Gary's 2 conferences in a row, you and I, every other week. Are we going to keep this up all year or what?
Yeah, well, we just got to stop meeting like this.
Exactly. Well, I think it's really exciting. It's an obvious kind of indicator that things are really starting to move in the mobile space,
yeah,
beyond just conversations or questions and that. So what's your kind of take on the last few weeks as far as meeting with all these folks about mobile?
Well, certainly there's a level of excitement that wasn't there. And you can see, if you know about technology curves, that we're starting to do a tipping point, that everybody's getting into it. 2 years ago, only a few people were speaking about it. But I actually saw it coming about 2008. I started writing reports about it. But I knew it had a 10-year history before that. But, you know, people tried things and it didn't work. Now they're at least finding things that work. And like all technologies, the first thing we do with new technologies, we try to take all the old ways of doing things and stuff them into the new technology. And I think one of the reasons that things are changing is people are starting to come up with new ideas, new uses of the particular affordances that mobile gives us.
Absolutely agree. You spend a lot of time kind of looking at data and looking at trends and stuff like that. Matter of fact, you have a book that really addresses the future of learning. Tell me a little bit about how you got into that.
I've always been interested in technologies. The problem is you can't just have technologies. You know, otherwise you end up with a lot of gadgets, like your camera here, and I'm sure you have lots of stuff, right? We have stuff. But as human beings, we also have a purpose in life. We live life to do things, to have meaning, to have family, and all those things. And if we don't integrate our technologies in with that, we find that we're just playing with toys. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are, since World War II, a much more mobile society. People who used to live in a village now live in the suburbs and commute into work, and they get scattered in all sorts of directions, and anything they do requires a minivan. So, you know, basically the speed of society has picked up. At least I'm talking about North American society, probably European society. A lot of that's, I think, being fueled by the fact that we found out how to really use oil to propel ourselves around, and maybe as oil peaks, as it probably has in the last year or two, and starts to decline and demand goes up, we're going to find that we're going to have another radical shift in the next 20 years of how much people move around. But right now we're a moving society. We fly everywhere, we take the train or we drive places, we're just on the move all the time. So mobility is a fact of life, and the technology in a sense has caught up to allow us to maintain relationships even while we're on the move, and now how we can learn while we're on the move.
So again, we create this technology out of necessity. And now we're trying to figure out exactly how to take advantage of it, how to use it.
Well, I don't know about necessity, but we certainly created it for a specific purpose, which was a mobile phone. So there's actually a 100-year history here of mobile phones. It starts with Hilda Ericsson, Lars Ericsson's wife, who said, "Put a phone in the car, Lars," in Sweden around 1910, and he took a couple of poles and would hook up to those newfangled telephone wires that were being put up through Sweden, and they'd drive along in their car, and he'd attach 2 wires up to the telephone poles, and she could make a call. So she's actually responsible for phones and cars.
Nice. Again, another inspired woman that inspired her husband to do something brilliant.
Absolutely. Behind every great technical gadgetry, there's a woman saying, "Get off your ass and do something."
It's part of the honey-do list. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you think that people are taking away from this conference in general?
I think it depends on what level you are. And in general, I think people who are in corporate training, which is I think the major group that's here, are just starting to look at mobile learning and saying, "Oh, so what do we do?" You know, they're now become aware that it's a movement, that there's a lot of people looking at it, but there's not a lot of case studies of people having done it. In my book, I have 8 case studies, and I know of a few more. But everybody's been hearing about it. So I think a lot of people are here to kick the tires, to use a bad metaphor. And they are asking basic questions like, so what is it? What can you do with it? And what should I do with it in my company when I go back home? People are saying, well, okay, so what do I do next? So that's why I'm talking a lot about strategy. Because I don't think there's any point in going out and buying a pile of iPads or smartphones and not having to figure out what you're going to do with them.
Or standardizing on some software tool or whatever, and this is the way we're going to do it for the next 5 years.
Yeah, well, if you're going to do anything standardized for the next 5 years, you're going to get left in the dust, because in 5 years it's all going to have changed.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to have that flexibility, I think, of being open to what's changing, but also, Bertrand Russell said, people like to die by the latest method.
Mm-hmm.
So, you don't need to buy this stuff for its own sake. You don't need to do anything until you figure out why you want to do it and what business problem this particular technology is going to solve.
That's just like all the training that we do, right? I mean, we need to make sure that we need the training first, and it's that we're training the right thing and kind of settling in on the right objectives.
Well, it could be that, and maybe the real shift is not even that. It's don't do training at all until you need it, right? So there's a number of shifts here. One of the shifts is to move away from a training course-based, classroom-based model to a just-in-time, just-in-need, and just-for-me model that learning happens when you need it on a particular problem.
I hear people kind of struggling with that a little bit. I think that's the instructional designers or these learning development professionals. They're not sure they're ready to be performance support people.
Right. And it's understandable. People don't like change, but also they don't like change that threatens their jobs. And if you are a classroom-based trainer or instructional designer, and by the way, I think that e-learning is generally taken classroom metaphors and models and just transferred them to the screen. And instead of paying attention to the teacher at the front of the room, we now pay attention to the screen that's right here. What somebody's called an attention well. And then a mobile, there are people who are walking around like this all the time, and they don't see the rest of the world because they're staring at their mobile phone. What the possibility is here, and I talked about this in my session yesterday, was to reactivate people back to figuring out what the world's about around them and interacting with the world and with the people in it. And then the mobile phone becomes a supplement or an augmentation device that gives them more information or allows them to take what they're doing and share it with others. But it's not the central thing. The technology's got to fade away and not be the central thing. We need to get back to human relations and to interacting with the real world and real problems, because we have some.
So it's in a way, it's enabling us to reconnect with the world.
Yes, I called my session "Reactivating the Learner," because I think and I think it's important to mention activity. Again, the history of the classroom for 250 years, since the 1770s, has been about immobilizing the learner, putting the learner in a seat, paying attention to the teacher. Don't do anything. Raise your hand. And in the most extreme form of that is called monitorial education. You had monitors looking down every row to make sure everybody did everything exactly at the same time in the same way. So it became a way of standardizing people, which is very efficient if you want to turn out people that are all the same. So we've had 250 years of that. And the affordances of mobile technology allow us to do something different. But our first thought is always, well, can we continue that model onto this new technology? But the fact of mobility actually makes a difference, right? And people have asked me a question like, okay, so we take mobile phones into the classroom, is that mobile learning? And my answer to that is, well, it's sort of like if you had a rule that said you could only listen to your car radio while your car is parked in the garage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do it.
Right.
But it's not really mobile learning if you have mobile phones in the classroom, unless it enriches the possibility of doing something they couldn't do in the classroom before. So it may bring in some information, but then it's just really a mini computer in your hand. The fact is that if they can go out of the classroom and now do things, maybe bring it back to the classroom and integrate it, so you don't have to do, it's not one or the other. But the fact that they can be mobile means new possibilities. One group in England, there's a book out called Mudlarking in Deptford, England.
Great title.
Yeah, it's a great title. And what they did is they took students, high school students, out to the mud flats in Deptford to explore. to get into the mud, to look at the rocks, to look at the bugs, to look at the plants, and use mobile phones to document what they were finding, right? Or to take notes on what they're finding, and to share with other classmates what they found. That to me is the classroom moved out of the physical room into the world. And that's what makes the difference in mobility, is it allows us now to move out.
You're also talking about how the students involved in it, how they're connecting and how
Right.
they're bringing back information and discovering things for themselves.
Right.
I think that's an important aspect of learning that maybe it's more difficult in the classroom, and not everybody implements a classroom that same way.
Well, the other thing too, if you think about it, the classroom is a form of reduced experience. It's actually a form of sensory deprivation. Because what it does is it changes our real experience of our senses and our bodies interacting with the world into a symbolic experience that's in books and teachers speaking and students speaking. So it becomes a verbal, written kind of experience rather than a direct experience with the world. So getting out of the classroom brings us back into actually using our senses in a different way, and to reconnecting with the world in a sensory way, and to use our bodies in terms of moving through the world and experience it, listening to the sounds that are out there and the soundscapes that we go through. We tend to forget that. In fact, we often send kids out into the world with earphones in their ears, and they're listening to something and they're missing the fact that there's sounds happening all around them.
Well, again, you're allowing people to learn the way they naturally learn, the way we're built to learn, and that's through experiences and sensory, like you're saying.
Right.
So,
and I think that makes a difference in terms of pedagogy. So then you have to start thinking about, how do we teach? So I've been talking about enactivism, enactive learning, as teaching through bodily experiences and through the senses. And mobile is perfect for that. It allows you to send people out on field trips. Now, you start to lose control, and maybe students are not going to be passive recipients of control procedures and have to learn some self-discipline and self-direction, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they're going to be more independent as people with the mobile possibilities.
More creative, better problem solvers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity there, I think, in that way, definitely. I see that.
Yeah. And they're not going to become standardized cookie-cutter people. Right.
Which is something we fight naturally anyways as human beings. All right, so Gary, if there's one thing, one final thought to kind of summarize this week, what would it be for you?
Well, summarizing this week is I just see a lot of people exploring, and they have to realize that to start in this business, you got to start with the business objectives. If you leave that out and just say, we're going to do mobile learning, you're lost.
Yeah.
So we got to have a process, and that's strategy. And one of the things I do is try to help people. So I've got a roadmap. It's on my website that people can download, free roadmap of mobile learning strategy. But that's a generic roadmap. So now you've got to take that and say, for my organization, what are the decisions I have to make? So I've mapped out the generic decisions, but you have to make them for your own company. And depending on what answers you come up with, you'll have a different path than another company. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think that's very important. Come to these conferences, engage in conversation, talk to the people that have had the experience and understand the technology, and bring your business with that. Understand that and put together that strategy.
And then sit down and make your own individual plan.
Absolutely. Well, pleasure talking to you. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at next conference.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right.
Okay.
Excellent.